Let me tell you a quick story today that will set up what we're going to hear from Nehemiah chapter 10. As most of you know, I spent a lot of time in the Army, and I also did a number of deployments to Afghanistan and Iraq. Most of those deployments were with the Army's Ranger Regiment. Now, way back in the day, I realize if you're a new guy in the Ranger Regiment today, this may be completely foreign to you. But way back in the day, Rangers had a policy that they had to have a fresh haircut every week on the first day of the week. Now, let me tell you how these two things started to become a problem. Because as we were going back and forth to Iraq and Afghanistan, when the Rangers left, when the Rangers came back, it was supposed to be classified. And then you have to picture in your mind that every one of these guys are getting a fresh haircut every week, let's say on Sunday afternoon. So they all load up on airplanes and they fly halfway over to Iraq or halfway over to Afghanistan in what's called an intermediate staging base. And then they get off in Germany or in Kuwait or in Qatar. And every single guy on the airplane has the exact same haircut. You don't even need to know what you're looking at to realize those guys stick out like a sore thumb. And anybody who knows the Ranger Regiment back in those early days of the global war on terrorism knew those were Rangers that were getting off of the airplane and flying over to Afghanistan. Those are Rangers that were on their way to Iraq. We stood out like a sore thumb, and it was a very long, very difficult, very painful process for the Ranger commander to finally decide we got to do something about this haircut because it's putting guys' lives in jeopardy. What does that have to do with Nehemiah chapter 10? Well, let me explain it to you this way. Tim Keller, the founding pastor of Redeemer Presbyterian Church in New York City, was talking about the gospel. He was doing a conference at his church, and in this conference, he described what the gospel is. And Tim Keller made this statement about how you and I, who are impacted by the gospel, we stand out like a sore thumb. We stick out like Rangers that are getting off of an airplane in Kuwait on their way to a classified operation. Keller said it this way. He said, the gospel isn't just the ABCs of belief that saves you. It is those things, but it's much, much more than that. His statement goes like this. The gospel isn't just the ABCs of belief that saves you. No, it is the A to Z of the whole Christian faith. It is everything that we believe as Christians. The gospel is supposed to radically, fundamentally alter you in such a way that now you stick out like a sore thumb. There's no way that you can blend in anymore. Because of who you are, because of whose you are, because of what you believe, you have been fundamentally altered by the gospel, which means the way that you live and what you do with your time and your money, the impact that it makes on relationships, virtually every area of your life. It's not just the cheat codes, not just the answer to the test questions that get you into heaven, but virtually every area of your life is impacted by the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ. So here's what I want you to understand, not just from Nehemiah chapter 10 today. Here's what I want you to understand. If you call yourself a faithful follower of King Jesus, the gospel is much more than just a few principles that we believe will get us into heaven. The gospel you behave, look at it on the screen, is the gospel that you believe. The way that you live out your faith, no matter what you claim to believe, the way that you live out your life, it is what you believe. It shows, it says to the world This is what is important to me. This is what I believe. So today what we're going to do, I hope you're super pumped about this like I am. Today we're going to dig into the last half of Nehemiah chapter 10. We're going to hear as the people of God come together for this really big church service, and they come together and they have this business meeting is really what it is, and they discuss how they're going to live out their faith, how they're going to practice what they claim to believe. Here's basically what you're going to see from Nehemiah today. In Nehemiah chapter 10, it describes how faith in Jesus Christ radically alters us. It alters us in almost every way imaginable. But today in Nehemiah chapter 10, you're going to see three very specific ways that what we believe about Jesus changes the way that we look at these three areas of our life. Three areas where you and I should behave the gospel. Before I even get into these three areas, let me make sure you understand what I mean by this word gospel that I'm going to say about 50 more times today. What I mean by this word is that you and I were dead in sin and completely incapable of earning God's forgiveness, so God took the initiative and sent his son Jesus on a suicide mission, sentenced his son Jesus on the cross to a brutal death in payment for our sins. The word gospel literally means good news. The good news is that Jesus' death has now satisfied the wrath of God and everything that was necessary to make you and me right with God. And now that you and I come to God in faith through the death of his son, Jesus Christ, everything about us is different. It's not just our eternity in heaven is different, but the life that we now live here on earth, John 10:10, is different. It is fuller. It is abundant because of the good news that Jesus radically and totally saved me. And every day that I get up, I start to notice some areas of my life that are not right with God, that still need to have some work in my life. And that's why every day when I get up, I need the gospel as much tomorrow and today as I did the day that it first saved me. So now let's go into these three areas. We'll see them very naturally from Nehemiah chapter 10, where we are supposed to be different, stand out like a sore thumb, where we're supposed to behave the gospel. And the first area that you're going to see from Nehemiah chapter 10 is in the area of relationships, specifically in the family relationships, in marriage relationships. Now, if you're single out there, hang with me for just a few minutes because I'm going to tell you the kind of advice that I gave our children at the dinner table about the kind of husband or wife to pursue or the kind of person to date. But Nehemiah chapter 10, we're going to start reading in just a second in verse 28. In verse 28. And we're going to hear how the people of God come together and make this commitment to God. Here's what Nehemiah chapter 10, verse 28 says, and this scripture is right there in front of you in that mobile app. It says, the rest of the people, the priests, Levites, gatekeepers, singers, and temple servants, along with their wives, sons, and daughters, everyone who was able to understand, pause for just a second. This list that we're looking at right now in verse 28 is a return to the worship services that King David created way back in the Old Testament times, back before Israel was taken away into captivity, long before they returned to Jerusalem and Nehemiah started to restore the walls of Jerusalem and Ezra started to restore the worship in Jerusalem. Now you start to see the whole worship team referenced in the book of Nehemiah, which says we're starting to put together the way the people of God are supposed to worship. Again, it's now finally starting to happen in chapter 10 of the book of Nehemiah. All of these key players come together, but look at what it says next. Not just the key players, everyone who is able to understand and who has separated themselves from the surrounding people to obey God. I guess what this sentence is telling us is there are a lot of Jews that have returned to Jerusalem. Most of those Jews have been heavily impacted by the scriptures. They've heard Ezra read and preach 6-hour sermons from the Bible. Their lives have been seriously altered, but not all of them, because it looks like there's still a few people that are not willing to obey the law of God. But for everyone, moms and dads, sons and daughters, the temple workers, all of them come together, and everyone who is willing to make a commitment, look at what they do next. They join with their noble brothers and commit themselves with a sworn oath to follow the law of God given through God's servant Moses and to obey carefully all the commands. This is behaving their faith or behaving the gospel. To obey carefully all the commands, ordinances, and statutes of the Lord our God. And then the Bible does something really interesting. It ought to cause you to ask the question, wait a second, did we just take a hard right turn here? Why does it make this statement next? We will not give our daughters in marriage to the surrounding peoples, and we will not take their daughters as wives for our sons. If you're reading the Bible like me, when you get to this last sentence, you start to ask the question, why is this such a big deal? Why children? Why marriage? Why the surrounding nations? I mean, what's going on right here? And I'm going to try to answer all three of these questions really quickly for you. Israel has now moved back into the land that has been desolate for 140 years. The pagan nations have lived in the land that God promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and they brought their faith with them. And in the Old Testament, it was strictly forbidden to marry outside of your faith. In the New Testament, it is also strictly forbidden to marry outside your faith. Now you have all of the people of God coming back into Jerusalem, back into the promised land, but all of the folks that are living in the land don't share their beliefs. And so sons are starting to meet girls in the marketplace, and daughters are starting to talk to boys that are in the neighborhoods, and they don't share their family's faith. And the moms and dads, the priests and the Levites, but if you read carefully, Nehemiah tells us even the sons and daughters are going to make a commitment. We will not meet them, marry them. We will not mix our faiths together. So now the question becomes, why children? Why are moms and dads so serious about this? Because to this day, in most parts of the world, the responsibilities to make sure that your daughter's husband or your son's wife is a good match, a match where their faith is in common and they share each other's views and that they will have a good marriage. That responsibility in most of the world still lies with mom and dad. It is a holy privilege, and it is also a great responsibility that parents have to raise their children up to know and to love Jesus and to follow Jesus for the rest of their life, long after they move out of mom and dad's house. And nothing is more important, nothing will have a bigger impact on you than marriage. When I was in the military, I used to tell my friends this, I used to make this statement. When they were getting ready to get married and they were telling me, hey, I just proposed, she just said yes, we're setting the date. I used to tell them, this is the biggest decision that you'll ever make, far bigger than buying a house, far bigger than a career decision. This decision is the single most important and most influential decision you'll ever make, because when you marry the right girl, your life will experience joy and fulfillment because of this decision. But you marry the wrong girl, I used to tell my friends this way, and it will be hell on earth. Parents had this holy responsibility in Old Testament, even in New Testament times, and most of the rest of the world shared this holy responsibility. Parents took this business really seriously as 50 Cent takes it in the movie Den of Thieves. Check this clip out and put yourself in this girl's shoes, ladies. Put yourself in this guy's shoes, guys. Check this out, will you?
Damn, girl, you're looking fine.
You look amazing.
How are you? Looking good?
Thank you. This is my mom.
Hi.
This is Rolando.
Nice to meet you. Rolando.
Nice to meet you.
I see where you get your looks from.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I take that?
Oh, yeah.
Rolando, this is my dad.
What's up, Mr. Laveau? Nice to meet you.
Yeah, let me holler at him for a second. Oh, let me talk to you, bro.
Don't worry about it, okay? We're just gonna talk.
So here's what's up. For the past 16 years, my daughter's safety and protection has been my responsibility and my responsibility only. Now, for the first time in her life, I gotta hand you that responsibility. Don't f up. Or your mama will weep if she has to whip around every day the rest of your life. Now, I worked on this because I want to say this to you as nice as possible. You understand?
Yeah. Yes, sir.
Toi si ke haiu agora timing. Eh? Kwa mo to hila mai ai.
Okay.
Eh? Se kefe.
It's all right. It's all right. Listen. All he's trying to say is it's wonderful to meet you, and he wants you to have a beautiful evening.
I'll see you at 11:30.
Yeah. 11:30. Yeah, 11:30.
Good choice. I think you got the picture, bro.
Oh man, I love that clip so much because if you're a father or a mother and your child is starting to get serious about somebody else, if you're a dad like me of two beautiful daughters, you're thinking like 50 Cent is in this movie. Like, I got to make sure that this guy is going to honor my daughter. I got to make sure that this guy is going to cherish my son, or this girl is going to cherish my son. You see, what the Bible is essentially saying here is the gospel has fundamentally altered everything about relationships. When my children were younger and we were sitting at the dinner table, I used to say this often. I used to say, listen, I don't care what country, I don't care what culture, I don't care what color of skin of the guy or the gal that you marry, but don't even bring them in the house if they don't share our family's faith. You see, this is such a powerful and an important decision. This will have such a massive influence on you that if that guy or that girl that you're starting to get serious about doesn't share your faith, you can just go ahead and swipe left and keep right on looking, because I can't give my blessing on this union if she doesn't share your faith, boys, if he doesn't share your faith, girls. It's such a big deal. Let me give you one more quick example of why the gospel fundamentally alters the way that we look at marriage and how we look at relationships. Because when a couple goes to the altar and when they say those three words to one another at their wedding day, I love you, in the back of my mind, I often think to myself, what do they mean exactly by those three words? You see, when you're not a Christian, oftentimes what you mean by the words, I love you, is he makes me feel so good about myself. He makes me feel so happy. I enjoy myself. My life is more pleasant when he's around. And really what I love you says is I love me and I love how my life is while you're around. And as long as my life is awesome, then I love you. That is a pagan notion, an unbiblical idea of love. For the Christian, when they stand at the altar and when they say, I love you, they're giving a picture of the way that God loves, this agape love in the New Testament, where God makes a commitment regardless of circumstances, that this love is perfect and nothing can stop it. When a Christian stands at the altar and says to her husband, or he says to his wife, I love you, he's referencing this Old Testament idea of hesed, this covenant love that says, I'm entering into an agreement with you and nothing and no one will ever cause me to break my end of the agreement. Do you see how fundamental the gospel alters our behavior? How it changes even our belief system? The words, I love you, are different for men and women who have been altered or changed by the gospel. The first area that the gospel changes our lives, the first area where we behave the gospel is children. And the second area is in your calendar. And now we're talking about time. And if you live in this crazy, frantic world like most of us, the way that we view our God impacts what we do with our time. We just don't have the time to give to what everybody else gives their time to. We're going to pick up now in Nehemiah chapter 10, and we're going to see a fascinating, I think a mind-blowing sentence, just one sentence of how radical their faith altered them back in 2,500 years ago in Jerusalem, and how radical the gospel is supposed to alter us today. Nehemiah chapter 10, let's just look at verse 31. It says, when the surrounding peoples bring merchandise of any kind of grain to sell on the Sabbath day, we will not buy from them on the Sabbath or on holy days. Pause, because I really got to talk about this first sentence in verse 31 for a second. 2,500 years ago, the people of Israel started to move back into Jerusalem. They were trying to restart the economy. Nehemiah even tells us earlier in this book that the economy is struggling and that people are suffering. And the Jews were making it worse by keeping each other in debt, which is something the Bible strictly forbids. Even Nehemiah fell into this trick or this habit. And then they dealt with the debt and they decided we're not gonna treat each other unfairly. We're gonna follow the Bible in the way that we do business with each other. But let me remind you, now they're living in a land that is largely populated by people that don't share their beliefs, that don't practice the Sabbath. So they're going to the market, they're selling their product, they're bringing their grain from their fields to the market on the holy days, and they're doing a lot of business. What this first sentence is saying is that the people of God decided, I'm not going to do business. My belief, the gospel changes the way that I act in the boardroom and in the break room at work and in my home office. It changes everything about me, even the way that I conduct business. What it's really saying is we're going to give up 1/7 of the opportunity, 1/7 of the time that the other pagans in the land do business and make money. We're going to give that up. And we're going to lose a lot of money in the process, but God has first place in our lives, and God decides how we, notice what it's saying here, spend our time. He decides what I do with my calendar. And I don't get a chance to live my life the way that other people live their lives because I owe him first place in my life. It is incredible. In fact, if you are not a Jew and you're living in Jerusalem 2,500 years ago and you read this first sentence, it almost looks insane that the people would be willing to, Kanye West, be closed on Sunday just like Chick-fil-A. Why would you do that and give up all of that business? But it gets even more insane in the second sentence. Because look at what they say next. And now they're following specific passages from Exodus, Leviticus, and Deuteronomy. We will also leave the land uncultivated on the seventh year, and we will cancel every debt. Now, in Exodus and Leviticus, there was a holy responsibility that if you owned a farm, for 6 years, you would grow crops and you would bring a portion of the first crops to the temple, and the rest of that crop you would take to the market and that you would sell. But on the seventh year, you would just let your land go unplowed and unplanted. Crops would still grow up because, of course, seeds fell in the ground when you were harvesting last year. The reason why that ground was supposed to go unplanted is so that you, as a farmer, could take an entire year off of work. Think about this. Every seventh year, you were taking a 1-year sabbatical. The ground itself was taking a 1-year sabbatical. And as foreigners, and as widows and people that were homeless and in deep need passed through the land, they saw this field over there that wasn't being tended to, and they would walk through that field and they would freely pick some of the grain that fell on the ground last year and grew up this year. They would pick some of that grain, they would eat that grain, and it would keep them alive for a year. Basically, your farm became free grazing lands for any foreigner or people that were in need every seventh year. And it was God's way of providing for people that were really hurting, but it was also God's way of giving you a 1-year break from work. We don't know what this feels like today. We don't even find time to take the vacation days that our businesses or the military gives us, let alone something like this. But the last phrase on the screen is even more insane than that. Imagine your neighbor owes you $5,000 or $50,000, and your neighbor is also a Jew. Every seventh year, you would totally and completely forgive that debt. And you would say, you know the money that you owe me? The account is zero. We're going to chalk that up as God has given me the resources to take care of you and to bless you and to minister to you. And I want you to just forget about what you owe me on this seventh year. This is how radical the gospel altered their calendars back in ancient Nehemiah's times. And it's supposed to alter the way that we practice our faith and what we do with our time today. Y'all, you and I are going to have to take the time to spend with Jesus some focused time. I believe he deserves a little bit of focused time from you every day. I believe that he deserves some focused time, some special time set aside from you every month. I believe that every year you should find some time to get away for a day or for a weekend and just focus on your faith. You and I may not be able to take the year off every seventh year like they could back in ancient times, but you can take a day off a week and give that day back to Jesus. You can take a weekend off once a year and give that weekend, invest that weekend into your relationship with Jesus. If you don't, if you're not really deliberate about this, Netflix or NBA 2K20 or Instagram is going to take every minute of every day, and there'll be nothing left over for Jesus. And I'm going to give you an example. In fact, I'm going to give you a prayer request about how serious this is. I want you to pray for a guy that I met this week by the name of Ron. Ron, I was sharing the gospel with Ron yesterday on downtown in Uptown Columbus. And Ron is a drug baby, meaning that Ron's mama was a very committed Christian and she drug him to church every day when he was a young kid. When I stopped Ron and I started talking to Ron and I asked Ron questions about his faith and about Jesus, he said, these are his words, not mine, I know who Jesus is, I believe in Jesus, but I also believe in a lot of other things. I think that Jesus is a good man. He's a good moral teacher. He's a good religious leader. But he's certainly not the guy that I have surrendered my soul to. He's not the guy that I spend my time focused on. He said, when I became an adult and my mama gave me the option, I stopped going to church. Because from that moment forward, church had no real relevance in my life. In fact, I was only going to church because my mama made me. And at the first opportunity that I didn't have to spend my time in church with these hypocrites, I stopped going to church. And I just sat there and listened to this guy tell the story. And I'm going to say this to you, and it may sound crass. It may even upset some of you out there. Hang with me for just a second. If you share Ron's beliefs, I would stop going to church too. Because if all Jesus is some good moral leader, if all Jesus is some religious leader, some teacher who kind of tells us how we're supposed to live our lives, you can get that from 50 other places on the internet. You can get that from 50 other religious leaders. So why would you waste your time getting up and going to church to a pastor who sells you this forgiveness-only gospel, or worse, cheapens the gospel and turns it into just a set of moral rules? If that's what you heard growing up and all you know about Jesus is he's just some moral leader, then don't spend your time going to church and worshiping Jesus. No, for men and women who have been radically altered by the gospel, we get up and we go to church. Well, actually, you watch it on your tablet or on your TV because your life has been so altered that you want to give this time back to Jesus. It's time that you could be spending, making money and doing stuff. And instead of doing other stuff, or instead of doing business and making money, you set this time aside in your calendar. You give this time back to Jesus. The gospel is changing the way that we look at relationships, and it changes the way that parents raise their children. The gospel is impacting our calendar and what we do with our time. And then brace yourself for it. I didn't write this chapter, Nehemiah did, but the last area where the gospel really impacts us is in your checking account. And this, let's be honest, it's enough of a challenge to let the gospel impact the spouse or the mate that we're pursuing. It's an even bigger challenge for the gospel to tell me what I do or don't do with my time. But when we get to this one right here, y'all, it just got real. And now let's read the rest of Nehemiah chapter 10 and see just how much the gospel impacts the way that these people spent money. Starting in verse 32, reading to the end of chapter 10. We will impose the following commands on ourselves. And notice, we're doing this to ourselves because we love God. We're going to impose the following commands on ourselves: to give 1/8 of an ounce of silver yearly for the service of the house of our God. The bread displayed before the Lord, the daily grain offering, the regular burnt offerings, the Sabbath and new moon offerings, the appointed festivals, the holy things, the sin offerings to atone for Israel, and for all of the works of the house of our God. We have cast lots among the priests, Levites, and the people for the donations of wood by our ancestral families at the appointed times each year. They are to bring wood to our God's house, to burn on the altar of the Lord our God, as it is written in the law. We will bring the first fruits of our land and of every fruit tree to the Lord's house year after year, or year by year. We will also bring, check this out, the firstborn of our sons and of our livestock, as prescribed by the law. We will bring the firstborn of our herds and flocks to the house of our God, to the priests who serve in God's house. We'll bring a loaf from our first batch of dough to the priests and the storerooms of the house of our God. We'll also bring the first fruits of our grain offerings, every fruit tree, and of the new wine and fresh oil, a tenth of our land. That word tenth that you're reading in the Bible today is literally the word tithe, where we get the word tithe from. It is the word tenth in the Bible. A tenth of our land, or a tithe of our land's produce, belongs to the Levites. For the Levites are to collect the 1/10 offering, the tithe, in all our agricultural towns. A priest from Aaron's descendants is to accompany the Levites when they collect the 10th, and the Levites are to take a 10th of this offering to the storerooms of the treasury in the house of our God. For the Israelites and the Levites are to bring the contributions of grain, new wine, and fresh oil to the storerooms where the articles of the sanctuary are kept, and where the priests who are ministering, along with the gatekeepers and singers. And then the final words in Nehemiah chapter 10, the reason why we're giving all of this offering, the reason why God's people give is for this final sentence: we will not neglect the house of our God. The gospel, what they're saying in this last paragraph, has had such an impact on us that it affects the way that we raise our children, and it impacts relationships. It even impacts our definition of the word love. That's how big, how A to Z the gospel has changed us. The gospel impacts our calendar and what we do with our time. And we don't go to the market when everybody else goes to the market, and we don't sell grain at the same time that everybody else sells grain. We set time apart to be with Jesus and to give him the time that he deserves. And this is where it really gets serious. The gospel even impacts our checking account. You see, the fundamental difference for Christians, look up here for just a second and stay with me for just a moment, is the way we start to view money. If you were to look at the way Christians, those who have been radically changed by the altar, by the gospel, if you were to look at what we do with our money from outside the faith, like if you're not a Christian and you were to look at our checking account, it should look insane to you the way God's people view money, because the starting point is radically different. You see, the starting point for somebody that's not a Christian is my money. They would ask the question, why should I give 1/10 of my money to the church? Why should I give 1/10 of my money to make sure that the gospel is being proclaimed across my city and around the world? Why would I do that with my money? The starting point for Christians who have been radically altered by the gospel is his money. You see, the way we would look at this passage is to say, 100% of what's in my checking account belongs to Jesus. He's the one who gives me the ability to work. He's the one, by his common grace, that gives me the ability to make a paycheck. And whatever's in my account is his. It all belongs to him. And he graciously allows me to keep 90% of it, and only asks me to give 10% of his money back to him. Do you see how the starting point is different? for the person that hasn't been impacted. And this is why often when we're taking up an offering around here, I tell people, ask people, encourage people, if you don't know Jesus, don't give money. Because the way that you approach giving is going to be radically different. And the kind of giving that we're talking about in Nehemiah chapter 10. The starting point for a non-believer is grudgingly giving my money to these people or this church. The starting point for a Christian is I'm a steward and everything that's in my checking account belongs to him, and he's asked me to follow a few set of principles with his money laid out in the Bible. Of course, I'm going to give a tithe or 1/10 of his money back to the church. By the way, you couldn't eat bread in the Old Testament temple if you were a Levite. You didn't have meat to bring home to your family if you were a priest in the Old Testament. There wasn't wood to burn on the altar in the Old Testament if the people of God didn't give the way God instructed them to give. And the exact same thing is true today. We can't pay the bills. You can't watch this stream right now. We can't even have the lights on. We don't have a space to meet in if God's people aren't faithful to give from his checking account. I'm going to wrap up with this story real quickly, and then I'm going to explain how you can be radically altered by the gospel, perhaps for the first time. There's a preacher in England in the 19th century who tells a story about how a king received the gifts in his kingdom. He said that he was a good king, a noble king, that his subjects loved him. And this king had a humble servant that worked a farm, this little small 3-acre farm where this servant just gave his blood, sweat, and tears to bring stuff out of the ground and to feed his family and to take to market to buy for his family and their needs. This farmer was pouring everything that he had into his field. And one year, he pulled out the largest carrot that anyone has ever seen. Not the largest carrot that this farmer has ever seen. The largest carrot ever seen in the kingdom. The farmer, of course, is thinking, I can make a lot of money. This is a prize carrot that I can bring to market. But I love my king, and I want to serve my king, and I want to honor my king. So instead of taking the carrot to market, he took the carrot to the castle, and he asked for an audience with his king. And this humble servant, this farmer, brings this prize-winning carrot to the king. He says, this is the greatest crop I've ever produced. This is the largest carrot I've ever seen in my life. I've never seen anybody who's produced a carrot like this. And I want you to have this carrot. It is an offering, or it is a gift to you, my king. The king was deeply moved, not by this carrot, but by this farmer. And he told his servants to take the carrot and to go put it in his storerooms. And then he looked at this simple farmer and he said, I can tell that your heart is sincere, and I want to bless you. You didn't ask for anything in return, but I want to give you a piece of land right next to your little 3-acre farm. I have some land that belongs to the kingdom. It's an additional 3 acres. And that land I'm giving to you today as a gift. I am going to double your land, and I am going to give you my land. It is yours to keep because of this precious offering that you've given me. In the crowd, in the king's court that day, was one of his very wealthy, very powerful, very selfish nobles who made all of his wealth raising prize-winning horses. And this noble was stunned by what just happened between the king and the farmer. The noble went home and he thought about it. And then he decided to take the greatest horse on his farm and bring it back to the king and offer it to the king the next day as a gift. So with great circumstance and great show, the noble shows up the next day and he says to the king, I have a gift for you. It's right outside in your stables. I want you to come out there and look at it. The king gets off of his throne as a gesture to this noble, goes out and looks at the greatest, hands down, the greatest horse in the land. And the noble says to the king, I'm giving this to you as a gift. It is my way of honoring you. And the king looks at the noble and he thanks him sincerely and turns around and walks away and goes back to the throne. The noble is stunned because, as you already know, he gave this horse away in hopes that he would get a double portion of his kingdom, his land, his ranch. And he's so confused that when he gets back into the court, he says to the king, I don't understand. The farmer yesterday gave a carrot and you doubled his land. I just gave you the greatest horse in the land as a gift for you. I don't understand why you're not offering anything in return. And this very wise king, the pastor in England said many years ago, answered this way: that noble or that farmer gave a gift to me because he loves me. And because he loves me, I wanted to honor that gift. And although he didn't ask for it, I gave him another portion of land as a way of blessing him for the honor that he did me. He gave me this gift because he loves me. And then he looked at the noble and he said, the gift that you just gave, you gave to me because you love you and because you want more out of this gift. You see, it's not the gift itself. And now listen to me, Christian, or listen to me if you're not a Christian. It's not what you give. It's why you give that's ultimately most important. Now I want to wrap up with this. The gift given in surrender, the gift given in love, the gift given because the gospel has fundamentally altered us is what 2 Corinthians refers to as a cheerful giver, a gift given in love. But the gift that is given for selfish reasons is a gift that is expecting something in return. And we love God. This is what's different about Christianity than every other religion out there. We love God because he first loved us, and only because he first loved us. Because he loved us so much that the gospel tells us he would not leave us separated from him and in our sin. That he would go after us to grab us and to rescue us and to pull us back from our sin. And our sin is so terrible, we are so impacted by sin that it would cost God everything. Literally, he would have to give his only son as the payment for our sin. The Bible tells it this way in the book of Romans, that we love him because he first loved us and he gave his life for us. In other words, the way that we know he first loved us is the gift that God gave to us, the gift of his son, Jesus. So giving a little bit out of our checkbook, giving a little bit of time in our calendar, given a focus and a direction to our relationships and pointing our children towards godly relationships is a very small, it is an insignificant offering of worship in return. Maybe you're hearing this message for the first time. And maybe you're realizing that you've approached God like that noble who donated the horse, that you've come to him wanting something in return. And it's actually never been a moment of true and honest surrender, of you just coming to him and saying, I have nothing to give you in return, but today I am offering you my soul, I'm offering you my life, I'm offering you my future. And I'm asking you to clean me up. maybe what you need to do right now is surrender to King Jesus for the first time. I'm going to pray for you. Maybe you're represented by that second sentence on the screen, and you're realizing, man, my schedule has become so intense, my time has become so bombarded that I don't really have much time. Jesus is getting pushed out of my calendar, and there's not much left for him. And what you need to do is make a commitment that you are going to spend a few minutes, just a few minutes, but every day next week, you're going to spend a few minutes with Jesus, entering into a relationship, going deeper in your journey with him. And because what you behave shouts the gospel to your friends and your neighbors, all of us that are Christians should be able to say number 3 on the screen. I will show someone, not just say it with my mouth. I will show them with my actions this week. I will show them that Jesus is King of my life. I will show my faith to somebody with my actions this week. God, you help me know who and how, but this week I'm going to show somebody my faith. I'm going to ask you right where you're at, in that living room or around the tablet, or maybe you're in your backyard, to just pause for a second and pray with me, will you? God, today we see vividly from Nehemiah chapter 10 how people's lives were so altered by your great love, how your gospel, the good news that you would send a Savior that would rescue your people, the good news that you have sent your Son Jesus to rescue us, alters everything about us. It's not just the ABCs of a few things that we believe will get our sins forgiven and get us into heaven. No, it's the A to Z of everything about that we believe. And God, today, I pray for your people. I pray for those that have really crazy busy schedules, that they're making a commitment to you right now. This isn't a commitment to me. It's certainly not a commitment to this church, but they're making a holy commitment to you, that they're going to find a few moments or force a few moments into their schedule by forcing something else off of their calendar to spend a few moments every day this week in their pursuing their relationship with you. And God, I believe that you'll bless them. I believe that you'll grow them. I believe that their faith will become stronger because of this. God, I pray for people today who are serious about advancing the gospel and pushing back darkness and penetrating the deep recesses in our community with people that have never heard, don't understand, guys like Ron that really don't understand that Jesus is not just a good moral leader or a religious teacher, that he is the Son of God who gave his life up in exchange for my sins, in exchange for Ron's sins. Would you help your people this week to do something, to put the gospel on display in such a powerful and radical way that the people that see it cannot explain it away for anything more than that must be God at work in her or God at work through him. Father, more than anything else, I pray that if somebody's tuned in anywhere around the country, anywhere around the world that's watching this stream right now, whenever they're catching this stream and they haven't been radically altered by the gospel, God, it is my prayer that today, right now, wherever they're at, whatever they were doing, they would just stop what they were doing and they would cry out to you a simple prayer of faith that sounds something like this: God, I am a sinner. I am incapable of earning my way to heaven. If I could earn my way in, then there would be no need for you to send your Son, Jesus. So the very fact that you were willing to send Jesus, the fact that Jesus was willing to leave heaven and come to earth and die this terrible death on the cross says that I can't do it. I can't make it on my own. And God, I believe that you loved me so much that you sent your Son, Jesus, and if it were me and only me, the only person on the planet, he would have to suffer just as much on the cross to pay for my sins. And so God, right here, right now, I am turning from my sins and I am turning to you and I am surrendering everything 100% over to you. God, my time, my relationships, my money, It all belongs to you from this moment forward. I trust you. You will do a better job with it than I have. And God, all that I ask in return is that you would move inside of me. You would change me. You would turn me into a new man or a new woman right now. Father, if somebody's making that commitment and they're serious about it for the first time in their life, would you do a miracle in their heart? Would you do the miracle of new birth and take somebody who is dead in sin and make them alive in Jesus Christ for the first time? And then, God, would you give us the privilege of finding out about this commitment that they're making today? I pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen.